Observation is a sci-fi thriller / horror game taking place on a remote space station engulfed in a haunting cosmic mystery. You play as an AI on board the ship, assisting Dr. Emma Fisher, the seemingly lone astronaut on the station, after a strange event has teleported both of you to the orbit of Saturn. So this is one of those games where I have to be really careful what I say when talking about the story, because the best way to approach Observation is to have no prior knowledge of what it's about, at least in my opinion. With that in mind, this section of the review is probably going to be relatively short. I'll give a brief overview of the context of the plot without giving any specific details, as well as my general feelings on it and how I think the average gamer would receive it. Needless to say, it's weird, and I mean that in a good way. It doesn't waste any time building up to something big, it immediately throws you into a tense situation. Something's wrong with the station, you have to investigate. Before long, you realise that the ship you're in is orbiting Saturn, when it should be orbiting Earth. It turns out that Sam, the AI assigned to the vessel and the character you play as, has transported us here. When Dr. Emma Fisher asks why, he simply replies,
"I don't know."
Then the intro plays. This might be one of the best openings to a game that I've played in a long time. It sets the tone straight away. After that, well, I'm not going to go too much more into it. What I will say is that Observation never reveals all of its cards, and what I mean by that is, a lot of the events that happen throughout the story are confusing. Like I said, it's weird, but it's also very compelling. Even during the times where I wasn't quite sure what was going on, it still kept me intrigued because of how it was all presented, and this is something that the game deserves the most amount of praise for. Having the perspective of the player being strictly designated to the viewpoints of the AI is a stroke of genius on the writer's part. Again, without going into spoiler territory, Sam never seems to be an innocent bystander in everything that's going on. He's consistently framed throughout as a potential cause for everything that's happening. It would have been a lot more predictable for the developers to have you play as Emma Fisher trying to figure out what was wrong with Sam, but instead you play as the AI, navigating your core functions while also battling the turmoil spread throughout your system. I would also like to mention that I appreciate Saturn being the choice for the narrative setting. It's already a creepy planet, and the game manages to make it even more unnerving, to the point where it actually feels alive. Definitely one of the more scarier aspects of the experience overall. Despite its vagueness, there's plenty of substance to the plot that is relatively simple to digest. I would say it's one of those games that benefits from a replay. Things that are easy to miss the first time around would likely be clearer on a second playthrough. Alas, if you have a keen eye for detail, you'll probably pick up a lot more than I did when I played it. I really enjoyed the story, but I will say it's not for everyone, which is something I describe to the game overall. If you're looking for something concrete that lays everything out for you by the time you finish it, well, you're not going to get that here. That being said, if you want a story that's clever, has a lot of nuance, and contains plenty of more info beyond face value, then you'll likely really enjoy Observation's narrative as well. Given that you spend your time in and around a space station, the game world is pretty small. The station is split into multiple parts, including American, Russian, and Chinese sectors, which you gain access to as you progress. And yet, it's surprisingly easy to get lost. There are a lot of rooms that you can access, but they can only be viewed at specific angles. In short, the cameras are your eyes. Each room usually contains multiple, so you can usually see the whole space. That being said, a lot of rooms look similar, so if you're looking for specific items or pieces of information, it can take some time finding the right one. I don't really have a problem with this. As far as space stations go, it looks pretty realistic. And the fact that it is this complex despite its relatively small size is worth praising the level designers for. There's one other form of perspective that you're able to utilise, however, and that is the drone. Once powered, you are able to control and pilot it inside and outside the station, which can help getting into areas that cameras either cannot see clearly or aren't functioning. In terms of interactivity, the station is filled with terminals and computers, as well as other points of interest. Some of this is side stuff, world-building elements, things like that. Others are integral to the plot, whether that's because the machine contains vital information, grants access to new rooms, or has direct influence over parts of the space station. This level of depth is to be expected somewhat, since you are playing as an AI after all, but I'm happy that that aspect of the game goes beyond the narrative. It does feel like you're playing as an AI, albeit a bit of a slow one. Yeah, I'll get to that in a bit. If there's one criticism I have as far as the visuals are concerned, it's the UI. Personally, I found it quite difficult to read at times, especially when using the map. I can never tell which room was which because I couldn't read the names until I actually opened them. Likewise, other interfaces were fuzzy as well, and this isn't because I need glasses. Maybe. Hopefully. A lot of it is caused by the screen filters. I disabled motion blur and film grain since I always do that for any game I'm playing, but there's still other stuff there that, while immensely improving the atmosphere, does end up making some text harder to read. It didn't stop me playing at any point though, and I understand it is the way it is due to immersion reasons. And like I said before, the game is immersive, so it's not like it's for nothing. It would have helped if it looked a bit clearer, but at the end of the day, it's a minor complaint. The character model for Emma Fisher looks pretty good too, with some solid animations. You don't see her without her helmet on very often, but the times where you do never look goofy or off. As a side note, she's Welsh. Sorry, I have to give praise every time a video game has a Welsh character in it. Anyways, moving on. Bearing in mind that this is also technically a horror game, or at least it contains elements of horror, the station is really creepy to explore. Most of the time it's pretty dark, and it always felt like there was something waiting for you just around the corner. The music adds to that as well, which, by the way, is also excellently composed. It's safe to say the atmosphere has been nailed. I could probably make a pun there somewhere, but I'm not going to. Exploration is only really highlighted through using the drone. The majority of sightseeing comes from the cameras, as does most of the gameplay. This is where things get tricky, both in terms of overall complexity and how much most people would likely enjoy it. Regardless, let's get into it. What I've neglected to mention about Observations so far is that it is a puzzle game at heart, but these puzzles aren't your typical run-of-the-mill puzzles. They're not move the box from here to here or guide a beam of light to hit a target. They're much more complex, with some requiring you to think outside of the box. They don't hold your hand much either. They usually give you very little to work with, but just enough to kind of get you started. I will admit, I am not a master of puzzle games, but I've played my fair share, and there were a couple that I may or may not have had to Google. That isn't to say that they are too hard to the point where you have to rely on a guide. Likewise, searching up the answer didn't take away from the fun of it all. I gave it a fair shot, and I couldn't work it out. I'm sure there are plenty of people out there a lot more stubborn than me and can figure it out after much trial and error. So what exactly are the puzzles like? Well, you're playing as an AI, so all of them are technical, working through computer systems, analysing data, and managing various aspects of the space station as a whole. While you're trying to figure out the intricacies of a machine terminal, Emma is usually doing her own thing, so she doesn't exactly have time to help you out. All you can do is ask her to repeat her previous instruction, if you forget what it is you need to do. Yeah, this was a feature that I used plenty of times. I will admit, if there was one thing that took me out of the immersion, it was my awful attempt at being a sufficient AI. The amount of times I took ages to do something that Emma asked me to do is, pardon the pun, astronomical.
What would you like me to do? Emma, please repeat your instruction. Remind me, Emma, what can I do for you? Please repeat your previous request.
I was honestly the worst AI ever. I didn't even realise until about halfway through the game that there was an objective screen which gives you a bit more info, mainly on where to go. Make no mistake, when you're going into this game, you are going to be challenged. Unless you're highly experienced at puzzle games, there will be moments that will have you stumped. Really, it's because of these puzzles that I feel this game can be pretty divisive, and I have read plenty of people stating they stopped playing because of them. I completely get that. They require quite a bit of patience and a strong awareness of your surroundings to get through them, and for those wanting to see more of the story, this can be pretty off-putting. Personally, I liked most of them. I did feel a few were too vague for their own good though. There were times where I was missing the obvious, but then there were moments where even when I figured it out, it still didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Judging as a whole package, however, I appreciate the unorthodox approach to them. I mean, you're playing as an AI, something that isn't exactly a common concept in video games, so it only makes sense for the puzzles to not be the way you expect them to be. There is one more thing that I should quickly talk about, and that's the drone piloting. This is where you get a more hands-on approach to exploring the base, just without the hands. Assuming it's powered, you can take control of a drone and move around to your heart's content. I'm going to be honest, it's really annoying to control. I understand the difficulty in getting your bearings is intentional since you're in space, but it just feels way too unresponsive to be reliable. I bumped into things almost all the time, and when that happens, the screen fills up with thin static which just makes it harder to see. The viewpoint also feels too zoomed in. You'll be using the drone quite a bit, and while I didn't dread these situations, it was always a relief to go back to using the cameras. It's safe to say that the puzzles are the star of the show, even if they aren't the most accessible. To be fair, if they weren't challenging, then there really wouldn't be much else to this game from a gameplay standpoint. What you're seeing here is what you'll get, and if you don't like the look of it, then you probably won't enjoy Observation. I knew nothing about Observation before heading into it, aside from the fact that you play as an AI, and like I said before, I strongly recommend people approach the game in the same way. It's full of surprises in every department that would be hampered down if you knew some of the context already. That being said, it's not a game that everyone can easily enjoy. I know a game enjoyed by everyone doesn't exist, but this one in particular has a specific way of going about things that can make it harder to connect with the average gamer. Still, if you're looking for a compelling sci-fi narrative, you will almost certainly find that here. It's interesting, creepy, and inspired by similar famous sci-fi stories, so if that's your thing, then you have every reason to buy this game. And if you're looking for a challenging puzzle game with a slight twinge of horror sprinkled in, Observation has that as well. Its puzzles require complex thinking that will keep you engaged. On the downside, the difficulty might be too much for some to remain interested. Regardless of all of that, I really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend checking it out. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments what you would like to see me review next. Subscribe if you want, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.